All right, good evening. Welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. You are watching tonight. You are on the cutting edge of what it is we have to offer. Now, the conversation we had going on just a couple seconds ago before we went live, we were talking about what's his name? Chase Hughes? A Chase Hughes video on hacking humans, the loophole effect. And it was shared by Ruth. Ruth isn't here tonight, at least not yet anyway. And he was talking about some of the experiments they do, the Stanley Milgram experiments, the Ash conformity tests. Those are the Ash conformity tests have really grabbed my attention. Anybody else get a chance to watch that short video? We talked about it a little bit Sunday morning.
Yeah, I watched it.
So what'd y'all think about that?
I've heard and read about that experiment before. I was curious about the fact that near the end he said the most important thing about persuasion was novelty.
Yeah, he said like something mixed with authority, focus, and novelty.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it sounded like he was going to get into that more in the next video, which, as far as I can tell, has not posted yet.
Yeah, because I've read a couple of books by Robert Cialdini, who's an expert in persuasion, and I don't remember him mentioning novelty. So that's why I'm intrigued about that.
Oh, I read one of his books, Influence.
What was his name again?
Yeah. Robert Cialdini, Cialdini.
Cialdini.
Mm-hmm.
Which books do you read? The one called there's one called Influence at Work. There's one called guy looks like a used car salesman.
He actually did take a job as a used car salesman, I believe, and lots of other. He's a psychologist, but he wanted to investigate persuasion. So to carry out his research, he actually took jobs involving persuasion to see from the inside out what it was like.
Yeah, which is very interesting. I worked at I used to be a car dealer. I worked at a car dealership for a while as a salesperson before I went active military. Did that for about a year before I went active military. And it was very interesting. I kind of, like at this point in my life, I think I'd be able to have a lot more fun with it than I did at the time. It would be a lot of fun, but dealing with people, seeing what gets them going. I know that by time I go up to a store or a dealership or something like that, I have my mind set on something that I want, and the only thing they can do is talk me out of it, which sometimes they do. So Nick just joined a couple minutes late. If you can hear us, Nick, we were talking about how the brain is hijacked into compliance by Chase Hughes, the video that Ruth posted, talking about somebody. I got an echo with somebody too. Ash conformity experiments and that kind of stuff. I was in a kind of a debate thing with a Calvinist one time, and I was talking about the importance of being Ash negative and how to be Ash negative or trying to be. And one of the of course, you can tell when you're talking to somebody online that they're not really talking to you. They're taking what you say, and then they go Google a bunch of things to try to find a negative angle on it to use against you. And so as this Calvinist was doing that, he comes back and goes, David Koresh was Ash negative. David Koresh probably also drank water, you know?
I'm not quite catching the word just before negative.
Ash, like that. There's a guy, his name is Ash.
ACHE, I believe.
What's his first name? Does anybody know? I still have Robert Cialdini up here on my screen. The Ash conformity experiments after Solomon Ash.
Okay.
And so what he would do, they had an experiment where they would, let me see if I got something open that I can use. Let's see if I can use this one. They would have an experiment where they would show us a few lines, right? Let me copy this one and put it in a slide so I can display it real quick. Huh. And sorry for the time that this is taking, but it might be worth it for the viewers too, to kind of see this in action here. But they would get a bunch of people in a room. I'm going to share my screen now. They would get a bunch of people in a room and they would ask them questions like this. And I could ask you, the line on the left, of the line that you see on the left, which line on the right is the same length as the one on the left?
C.
Obviously, right? Now, we're not doing an experiment, but the way the experiment would go is you would have 10 people in a room and the experiment is only being conducted on one of them. And it might be 8 people, something like that. Anyway, the majority of the people, they would all answer the same wrong answer before it would get to the test subject. And so everyone's answering B, 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 that kind of thing. And then by the time it gets to the test subject, they will tend to answer along with the crowd, then along with what they see. Make sense? So even though C is the obvious answer, if the whole crowd says B before it gets to them, they will also say B greater than 65% of the time that they do this experiment with people.
So when you say somebody is ASH negative, does that mean they wouldn't buy into that? They'd say what they thought?
Right. If they're ASH negative, they would not, they would say C. They would not buy into what the rest of the crowd said.
Okay.
Right. So this is a simple thing with lines, right? But what if we're talking about a complicated doctrine and you're in the middle of a church and the other test subjects, it's not about like the length of lines, which is something rather simple, but it's more about some complicated doctrine, or whether or not God's omniscience also means that he must necessarily have elected who would be saved, that kind of stuff. When they start talking like that, how do we get people to be ASH negative and not go along with the rest of the crowd? Because going along with what the crowd thinks is very compelling. That's something else that was brought up in the video. Going along with what the crowd thinks is very compelling to people. People tend to do that. I don't know if y'all got any thoughts on that. Because when I hear this stuff, I go ahead, Dan.
I certainly don't have any ideas how to get people to stop doing that. I mean, it's yeah, I've seen that probably my whole life. You explain something to somebody, and they'll still go along with what they've always heard,
or what they think the majority opinion is at the time. Yeah,
I've
The
noticed.
thing is that they do that even when there's nobody else in their group there. And I guess they're just so hijacked by that.
Yeah,
that they can't
like the
see
unpresent
anything.
majority.
Yes.
yeah.
I noticed that when I guess I was around 19 years old, but it really stood out to me that when the seasons would change, like you're going into winter, well, people would dress in winter, you know, they wear a jacket or a coat. In summer, they would not. But if there was a really cold day in the summer or in the transition time, you know, people would dress according to the time of the year, not according to the temperature. I mean, it could even be colder than it is in winter, and they still not wear a jacket. But then on a winter day, when it's not even close to that cold, they'll be wearing a jacket. I mean, everybody typically. That seems conforming to, you know, the season.
There's like a mental overlay that they have. So
Right.
it one of the ways I think I see this in action is when I'm dealing with Calvinists, and you say, like, if you say something, like if I observe something in scripture that isn't exactly popular, they will say something like, are you trying to tell me that you're smarter than, thousands of years of theologians that came before you? They are trying to reinforce Ash positivity.
I actually had somebody say that to me one time. Is they say, "Oh, so you're saying you know something that no theologian in the history of the world has seen?"
Yeah, yep, I get
And
that
it's
all
like,
the time.
well, are you telling me that you've read everything written by every theologian who's ever lived?
Yeah.
Good
And I'm like,
answer.
this is what I see. This is the perspective that I see. This is what I see scripture saying.
Yeah.
And it's like the entire denominational Christian system is designed to get people to not even know what that is within themselves, to not acknowledge it, to not know what it is, and certainly not say it. And I think the edification model of Ephesians 4:16 absolutely demands that people say what they see, not conform to centralize to the center of the in group. You have
I
to.
think some of that's driven by, like, if I would say something that's against the party line, I get jumped on for being stupid rather than telling me what was wrong with what I said, because I'm certainly willing to listen and learn.
Yeah.
But if you tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about and I'm stupid, well, I'm here to learn. If I knew it, I wouldn't necessarily be asking questions or whatever, but I think that shuts a lot of people down. And
Right.
if you're trying to have a good faith discussion, why would you do that? I
Yeah,
think it's just exerting power. I'm sorry.
Nobody wants to be stigmatized by being called stupid. And so the majority of people will tend to keep their mouths shut. And I mean, I guess you could also say that this kind of delusion is what allows something like the Bolshevik Revolution to metastasize like it did into this evil thing where nobody's allowed to say what they think is true. And hey, Nick, and essentially what it seems like we have within churches, it's not a top-down tyrannical Bolshevik style, keep your mouth shut, conform to the party line, but it is an implied compliance when you join the group that you will be part of the gated institutional narrative and not think for yourself and cease being tuned in to what it is that you think is true based on your own experience.
Well, I'm thinking of something maybe the opposite. Like, is there some wisdom in going along with the majority in some situations? Like maybe they know something that I don't know.
I think most of the time it's more adaptive for the sake of survival to be part of an in-group that accepts you, regardless of what the mythopoetic narrative is that they subscribe to. As long as you don't rock the boat and you're part of a group, you're more likely to survive. Now, in this society that we have today, we've created ways where we can survive and get by without the in-group, but for most of human history, it's not been that way. And it's more adaptive to be part of a group, regardless of what they believe, regardless of how stupid the beliefs are. You're more likely to not die soon if you're part of a group. I think we're kind of wired that way. I didn't mean to cut you off, though.
Oh yeah, that's right. They might know something that I don't, and also there's this wisdom in not completely antagonizing the entire group needlessly, but But guessing how long a piece of line on a paper is, that's not going to antagonize anybody. So that's
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I think that
Depends on
gives
the
you
topic.
a microcosm of what's happening in a groupthink scenario. When you have when you're looking at lines on a paper, that's easy. But when you're talking about supralapsarianism and equal ultimacy, it's probably a lot more tempting. And then you got somebody explaining all these things, referring to Greek. It's probably a lot more tempting to go along with the group than to apply yourself to see what you think of these things.
I feel like I'm coming into this a little bit haphazardly.
Let's do it. It
just
doesn't matter.
yeah. But one of the things that comes to mind here is noticing how a group determines what's relevant versus how an individual determines what's relevant, and kind of the dynamic interplay between that. So you kind of can't just kind of forego the phenomena that is part of the things that you will notice are determined by other observers that you're connected to. So just in terms of like whatever your occupation is, for example, the whole notion of you being part of the group that you work with is that you're all focused on a particular parameter set or a task. And so that sort of cuts off so many things in the world in terms of what's important and what's relevant to the group. And then that group relevance also gets internalized into each individual. And that's what makes it a group. You see, so it's like conformity is not just, let's not make the mistake of like moralizing conformity and saying that like, oh, well, people who go along with what everybody says are bad and people who have their own individual thoughts are good, because that's just nonsense. And
well, I think that happens a lot though. Like if you're talking about the length of lines, it's, maybe you won't moralize that, but you might get ridiculed for being stupid. But if you're talking about anything within Christianity, groupthink applied to that usually is moralized. And you're right, it is stupid, but it typically is. It's hard to find a Christian who can speak without moralizing.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's hard to find anybody who can speak without moralizing, to be frank.
That's true.
So just trying to get rid of that moral layer of this good, that bad. So let's wipe that clean when it comes to group conformity, and just sort of notice that since we're not putting moral labels on anything, it's kind of necessary for you to, it's almost inferred that if you are a part of a group, you will conform and notice the things that the group is centralized around. You have to, or you're not part of the group.
Yeah. So there's like individual relevance realization, then there's collective relevance realization.
So let's draw that out first, wipe away the moral stuff, and look at the phenomenon from a collective level and an individual level. And then let's see like how we can draw out how we ought to be noticing our own conformity that is distracting us from what's real, because that's really the problem is not noticing what is actually the most relevant thing, which would be like the truth or what's real.
Yeah. So Seraphim is talking about the double-edged sword of heuristics and bias, and the same thing that makes us adaptive is like the recursive relevance realization. The same thing that makes us adaptive also makes it leads us to self-deception, because
That's what
relevance
I'm thinking.
realization
Yeah.
is backgrounding many more things than it is foregrounding.
Mm.
So when you could be backgrounding something very important without realizing it, and if you are optimizing for the wrong thing, you could be making things relevant that are in, you can only be noticing the things that bolster what you want rather than seeing clearly how things actually are.
And then if our analysis stays consistent, the group does the same thing. The group can be noticing things that are in actuality irrelevant, like the hypostatic union of God,
Right.
or the notion of 21st century notions of free will. Those are
Right,
irrelevant things to be
right.
talking about in a church. And that's at the group level.
Or whether
And
God is
so
expressed in
it's
modes or
important
persons.
to highlight
Yep.
that.
That one
I'm
came up
hearing some
today.
feedback.
Yeah, there is a little bit of feedback.
And there can be a variety of motivators for this ash conformity, depending on a variety of context or situations. And sometimes it can be adaptive, but in a lot of other situations, it may make sense to try to not just conform, but to try to, just determine what is reality here.
Yeah. When you say sometimes it can be adaptive depending on the context, I think contextualize adaptive wisdom, the word for that is phronesis, where you're exercising wisdom in the moment.
Yeah,
Whereas Sophia is the overarching concept of wisdom itself.
yeah,
So like the gestalt versus the slices. And both are needed. What were we saying, Joe?
no, that's all.
A lot of thoughts going through my head. Seraphim said, mystical and theological propositions like the hypostatic union are meant for internal edification within the group only, not proselytizing or apologetics. I kind of like what's the original guy who came up with hedonism? I forget his name. And it's not hedonism like we think of it today.
I think people associate hedonism with Epicurus.
Epicure,
and the Epicureans, which funny enough comes up in
Epicureans come up like in Acts 17, I think. Stoics and Epicureans.
17, So
the Epicurus, I think I just accidentally muted you, Nick, my bad. Epicurus advocate, he didn't believe in the gods per se, but he did advocate contemplating the gods if it brought something to you, if you got something out of it, which is interesting to me. So if you're thinking about the hypostatic union and it gives you a whole bunch of thoughts that are helpful and edifying and send you along a forward trajectory of growth, that kind of thing, I think that's wonderful. But if you start to make it a dogma whereby everybody else has to comply, that's different. Yeah. Well, especially today. Seraphim says Epicureanism and hedonism are very different. Yeah, especially today, for sure. I'm still getting a bit of an echo.
I've noticed that it seems like when Nick's muted,
it
it's
goes
not
away.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a sound. Your setup is up over there, Nick. If you have, like, I think you're usually in headphones, and there might be a reverberation coming back through. I have a cardioid mic on my end to try to deal with that. That's why I don't have the I don't use the headpiece mic when I'm doing this because of the feedback. But this microphone only captures certain things within a certain range, doesn't capture anything from the computer. What other thoughts do we have?
So one of the things that popped into my head when under the discussion of just going along with the crowd, I've noticed back when I used to watch James White that a lot of times when he was trying to run somebody down, he would say, "Well, I don't think he's even reformed," and he said that as if everybody listened to him is supposed to know, oh well, if he's not reformed, we should just stop listening to him, because anybody who's not reformed must be evil.
Yeah. I have to admit that I've committed that same error along other lines, though.
Yeah.
As when I was a pastor back in the past, or just in general, my thinking would be along the lines of, oh, they don't even something by which I identified myself, which automatically dismissed them as having anything relevant to say.
Yeah, and I've been in discussion groups, although not recently, but where before anybody can evaluate what you say, they have to know what college you went to, and sometimes they even want to know who your professors were. And then it's like once they know that, then they go, "Oh, okay, you're okay," or they can go, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about," but they never even actually engaged with what you said.
That it's interesting. It reminds me of Ian McGilchrist was talking about the peer review process in one of his videos.
No.
And he said that one of the experiments they did, they took 85 articles, like peer-reviewed, published scientific articles, papers that were published in scientific journals. And they pulled them out, typed them back up word for word, but put different lesser known names on those articles and resubmitted them for publication. And just because of the name recognition wasn't there and the university name recognition wasn't there, except for like 4 of them or something like that, they turned them all back, citing errors and problems, and they need more current data, that kind of thing, when they had already published the exact same paper under a different name.
Yeah.
I have, yeah, I could tell you a similar story, but
What's that?
I could relate a similar incident.
Yeah.
If a friend of mine told me that, well, he was telling somebody he knew about something about the Bible and the book of Revelation. But he told me, but this guy said, no, he just totally rejected that meaning for whatever. But then later, my friend told me, but now he's telling me, hey, here's the way it is. This is what it means. And he's telling me the very same thing that I tried to tell him that he rejected. And the reason was he heard it on television from a well-known televangelist. So that made all the difference.
Yeah, I used to have the same issue, mainly during my first marriage, and this is not an indictment on my first wife at all, but we would be talking about theological things, and my wife would be nodding, like not really expressing a problem with it. But then when she would hear the same thing from the pastor at church, then she would like fully accept it. Oh yeah, okay, now, like now she's fully on board. or you probably had this, guys, you tell your wife she's beautiful and she's like, okay, yeah, fine, and then but then she hears it from somebody else and it's even more flattering because maybe she thinks you're saying it out of obligation or something like that. Like, oh, I guess I really am beautiful if someone else said it. Something like that. It's interesting how familiarity, like Jesus even said, a prophet is not without honor except in his own country. Familiarity can degrade a person's view of your credibility.
Yeah. Would you like to hear my theory on that?
Yeah.
Why that is? Well, I think you said a lot. Familiarity. The person who's from afar versus the person who's near is well known. Okay, so the person who's well known, they everybody knows this person is great. Well, they can see the evidence for greatness, but they also see the evidence for familiarity. They see the person as a normal human. They know he goes to work. They know where he goes to work, where he lives, his relatives. Maybe they knew him as a child when.
So it diminishes the halo effect because they know too much about him.
They know all of the average normal stuff about him. But the expert from afar, they've never heard of him except for whatever it is that makes him great. And that's only the positive things about him. The exceeding, not the negative, not the average things. So that's all they hear. And that seems to be a factor.
And there's something called a halo effect where when you don't know somebody very well, but you know one very positive thing about them, you tend to presume without realizing you're doing so that every other area of their life is also equally wonderful, which isn't necessarily the case.
Yep.
Hey, Dan, you got me thinking.
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Sort of.
Okay,
P
so
is
so imagine a pyramid with a P in it. Okay, let's see if we
Got
can
it.
get that.
That's a good
Okay.
visual.
Okay, now
I like the visual aids here.
the P stands for propositions. Now, I wrote down propositions as a collection of thoughts that lead to group control. And then at the top of the P, right there's a line. You can put reformed. You can put 1-2 word buzzwords. And what it is, we all have propositions that we build our thought pattern on, right? And I don't want to go in this direction, but I could use it as an example. And I don't want people to mistake what I'm going to say, but say like me and Kevin were getting into the globe or the round earth or the flat earth. How many people now hang on, but this is just an example. Okay. E.g. Okay. So how many of us believe in the globe or the round earth, just group propositional teachings and have never verified what is really out there? Now I don't want to go down that avenue. I'm making
right.
It's an example. It can be anything else. It can be what else could you pick that would be the same, you know what I'm saying? Or the news would promote a certain thing. People just buy it regardless of verifying it. And so, the propositional thing, and Kevin, you have really kind of like got me to really think on that when I first started hearing you about, presuppositions. Okay. And that's what I meant by the presuppositions. And so our foundation are built on presuppositions, good or bad. I mean, good or bad, it doesn't matter. And the control ends up when you have a collective thought process on all your presuppositions, and then if somebody says one word, all your presuppositional thoughts go to that one word in just one jump, just one hurdle.
Yeah, those words are preloaded for you.
that's the perfect word to use. They're preloaded to come out of the cannon or your thought process, then to go either to the right or to the left or down the center. And people do that, just like that example you're talking about, the lines. People, I have a tendency not to go with the crowd, and my kids would tell you that. And I'm not bragging. It's just, I'm always like holding back, not, to like try to think it out. You know what I mean? I don't like to go along with crowds, and but many people do. But I mean, that's just when Dan mentioned, James White, I don't know if these guys know, if they're that clever to know the deception that's being put forth when they do that. It's possibility, I can't verify that, but I can certainly question it. And then if I question it, like Roberta would say, they'll try to dumb you down as a imbecile because I'm not smart enough to know what they're doing. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, you are smart enough to know that you're trying to catch on to the game that's being played, whether or not they're doing it purposely or not.
Mm.
So I don't know. Did that make any sense? But you got me thinking about just
that's very loaded. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
I just want to appreciate for a second here how helpful it is. And I think it's actually really healthy too, to like think through things in geometric shapes, or to think through shapes or something with substance. So like Billy's able to think through a notion that he's got going on in his mind through like a triangle, which, like it allows you to sort of think through the form of the thing that you're trying to. That's like real thinking for me. That's real thinking.
I'll be labeled a Illuminatist, Illuminati. Because I did, I drew a triangle. So, so, or if you hold your hands a certain way, I don't know, you can only do so much with your hands, right? I mean, there's only so many shapes you can pull off. Now, some are legit that people do for signaling people, but but anyways, when I draw the little pyramid.
Mm-hmm. No, I think I just want to appreciate for a second that it's very helpful when you're communicating, but I think, for everybody who's listening, it's also really a really good technique to start trying out, is to think through shapes, and it doesn't have to be like actual, geometric. It can be like a blob, or some sort of
have a
thing
3D
that is
visual of the thing that you're conceiving.
Exactly. And so, so with that image of using like a hierarchy or a triangle to represent the orientation of presuppositions and how they drive towards a particular conclusion, like all of the groundwork is laid and loaded and it drives to a particular conclusion. Like, the example used is reformed or something like that. And then, so what I wanted to say is that like when you're considering somebody like James White and how they might sort of try and, patronize you or make you feel stupid or something like that, you just have to know that they're really just operating from a completely different set of presuppositionally loaded baseline axioms of the triangle that you are not conforming with, and that you are not privy to, and that you are not experienced with. And what they're doing is they're trying to put that in your face, is that you're not operating in this triangle here, this presuppositional triangle that they are, and so therefore you're less than. And so it's really not they're kind of just operating in their own world, in which they have a lot of control over with what their station is in that particular group. And so, I don't really appreciate that, because Like, I like to try and place myself and be adaptable into any sort of group that I can try and help or be a part of in some way. And I just get the sense that if you took James White and stuck him in my world for 10 seconds, that he would be a complete and utterly useless imbecile. You know, just how he makes other people feel.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Completely useless. And so, you know, just to put that out there for a second, I really appreciate Billy thinking in that kind of, in that form, in that mode, you know?
Well, thinking geometrically, are you thinking something like mind maps too? Well,
It could be.
there is mind mapping software to,
Okay.
you know what I mean? You
Free
can,
mind. Yep.
yeah, FreeMind, XMind, and others.
So
Which-
go ahead, Joe.
Well, I had some other thoughts going back to tying conformity to the local profit, not without, not without honor, accepting.
Can you hold that thought just for a
Yeah,
second?
I can
Because
hold
I got something that's very fecund off what Billy was saying. And
Yep.
Billy, as you showed that diagram and you started talking, you mentioned propositions and then corrected it to presuppositions.
Correct.
Well, oppositions, it's a different prefix on the same word. Most people's presuppositions are propositions.
Mhm.
And one of the presuppositions is that propositional doctrines constitute a base requirement for Christianity, that kind of thing. That is a presupposition that, like, both provisionists and Calvinists have, for example, and it's one of the common errors. But if you think of the stack of the four kinds of knowing, what should emerge, like the deepest kind of knowing, a baby starts with participatory, then perspectival, you get into process, then you start saying words like mom and dad and food and yes and no. You start saying words after you have an underlying basis of the real kinds of knowing. Then you can start to use the currency of knowing. And what popped out at me with what you were saying is that these in groups, like on purpose, do it backwards to start with sets of propositions to then produce a mechanism of process of control.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
No, that's exactly right.
It's like a bubble. It's like you would think an economy would work well if there was a 1-for-1 exchange of currency for productivity. And that if propositional knowledge is the currency of knowledge, there should be a 1-for-1 exchange of propositional knowledge for real kinds of knowledge. But it's like this set of ideas constitutes a bubble that gives the Warren Buffetts of Christian doctrine inordinate amount of control over the rest of the little plebes who are operating at the 1-for-1 level. It's like an economic bubble that is bound to collapse, and it's going to collapse in the form of people living unwisely and nihilistically. Anyway, I think what you were getting at there, I think you kind of chiseled away at some soot that was covering up that that treasure in my mind. I want to explore deeper into that. But anyway, Joe.
Okay. Yeah. I was thinking two things about the prophet that has no honor among his own family and friends, while the prophet from afar does get the honor. And the local prophet might be part of a local group. Okay. And by prophesying, he may not be in conformity with that local group, right? Because I'm thinking if he is in conformity, why prophesy it? Everybody already knows it.
Right.
So I think there's a higher probability that the local prophet is part of a local group, and when he's prophesying not in conformity with that group, and that lack of conformity could be why that he's not so much accepted.
Yeah, I mean, look at the prophets in the Old Testament. You wouldn't exactly want to be one.
No.
It's not a comfortable life.
And I had another thought, and this one, may not be valid, but I'd like to ask what you think about it. Is that okay now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, if people, they don't think so highly of the local profit, could that be because they think negatively of themselves? And could that be due to the Calvinistic concept of total depravity floating around in the air? And they think that they're wretched, and by association, the local prophet is like themselves and also wretched or totally depraved, or at least not that wonderful.
So projection?
Yeah, like Freud might call it projection. But related to Calvinism, not necessarily having to be a Calvinist, but like you've always said, that even people who are not Calvinists can be influenced by concepts.
Yes.
Calvinist. So what do you think about that? It may not be very much of a
I would need to
factor.
spend some time thinking about it.
Yeah.
I would need to have that in mind as I interact with some fools.
But it's a thought. But I think the thing about the conformity with the local group and the prophet being a member seems to me more likely to be valid. And there could be a variety of reasons for that.
Yeah, I just don't want to get away from emphasizing that group conformity is like a totally necessary thing for group functionality. Like, so I don't want to get carried away into thinking that, quote, group conformity is in any way, bad, because the only issue is deception, like deviation from perceiving that which is real.
Well, I would encourage groups, like, you have to have conformity, but I would encourage groups to try to have conformity at the higher 3 levels of knowledge, not just the propositional level. Like have processes, have perspectives,
Right.
have participation, and have that kind of conformity rather than a belief thing. When, like what you were saying, Joe, the prophet may say something that is divergent from what the group thinks, but there's a common proposition underlying the different thing if they still have in-group compliance. And here's an example of that. If you have a charismatic leader who has a dream or a vision and then comes out with the big new thing that all Christians are supposed to do, his in-group will still accept him, because even though that's a new idea and nobody has that particular idea, it is based on the shared proposition that dreams and visions are legitimate and trustworthy and divine.
Assuming that they're good members of the group. In other words.
Yes, within the members of the group. So there's even though a particular proposition that is like a new proposal, you may not get yourself banished because it's based on previously accepted proposals within that group.
I was thinking of some conformity that seemed, well, never mind. I don't want to get off topic.
What? No, there is no topic.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was just thinking about where Paul wrote, if eating meat makes my brother to offend, I will eat no meat while the world standeth. So even though he knows that it's okay, but if it offends his brother, he won't do it. So that seems a type of conformity, And I think that might relate to what Nick was talking about for the good of the group.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's conformity to a, like, kind of sort of what Kevin was pushing back a little bit on. It's conformity at a deeper or more axiomatic level of something. And so if a group has a particular proposition set that must be conformed to at all costs, then that itself is a procedural error that needs to be corrected.
Mhm.
And it doesn't need to be corrected at the propositional level, because you'll just be ousted or cast out or not part of that group because you are not conforming with the content of their modus operandum. So to try and correct a conformity orientation, sometimes you have to consider something a little bit more axiomatic, like the process by which you're coming to those conclusions. And so you have to change the mode of what is being conformed to. So in that sense, Paul, I think it's in 1 Corinthians 8 or 9 that he's talking about this. He's conforming eventually what he'll get to in 1 Corinthians 13, which is a better, like a love, like charity. And so conforming to the image of Christ
Which, by the way, he starts off chapter 8 by saying that. Before he goes into whether or not you should eat the stuff or offer to idols. 8:1, he says, now touching things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffeth up, but charity edifieth. So he even leads with that, the point about charity. Anyway, I'm just trying to bolster your point here as you go.
Right, because the whole point in 1 Corinthians 8 all the way, there's a theme through 8 to 13 that the reasons why he's not conforming, or he is conforming to, like, say, a Jewish practice, by like abstaining from eating pork or something, is for the sake of a higher conformity of charity. Right. So something he disagrees with at the propositional level, even at the procedural level, he doesn't agree with the the procedure of not eating pork. It's arbitrary to him. It's done away. But for the procedural, or for the participatory, conformity of charity, he's like, I'm game. I'm compelled to do this thing, So the conformity conversation has so many layers and levels to it at an individual level, and that at a group level, and then at the level of action and virtue, that we should try as a group to be cognizant of and look at, because it's necessary. We're to be conformed to the image of Christ. You know what I mean?
And here is perhaps one of those other aspects, or another dimension to think about. This is principle versus implementation of the principle. And it seems that could apply at the propositional level and at the procedural level, and maybe, but it's like slicing the bread in a different direction.
I'm thinking, like, right now, if I were to attend a Catholic mass right now, I think that I could get something from that mass that was distinctively Catholic that I could be edified by. But I probably could not really emphasize that around an independent Baptist Christian brother. Even though I don't think there's anything wrong with getting edified by something that in a distinctively Catholic way, because it's like, just like things offered to idols. We know that the idols aren't really the thing. If you can extract it from the context and get the abstract and then reinterpret it in a way that works for you for edification, then do that. But I could not convince a level 2 or level 3 independent Baptist person that they could also do that.
Right.
So if I'm going to go speak in an independent Baptist church, I wouldn't exactly emphasize that aspect of my spirituality.
Right.
I would probably leave that out.
Because here's the secret that the fundamentalist can't know. The Catholic, most of the time, the Catholic knows that they're not worshiping idols. They know that they're not worshiping a statue.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? It's just easier for you in your stage 2 immaturity to think that the Catholic is in a stage 2 level or stage of faith.
Right.
To
They're
believe
projecting.
it's easier for you to think that.
Out of ignorance. Yep.
Most Catholics know that they're not worshiping a statue,
Right.
you know?
So another thing that occurred, like yesterday, I did a video on Calvinism yesterday. Well, as the audience for that video, I'm bolstering scriptural authority all day long, right? Because we're going to refute Calvinism at the level of scriptural authority, which you're going to do at level 3. There is going to come a time when the words, when the propositions, when the knowledge currency by which the sacred things are transmitted to you, there comes a time at which that currency becomes transparent. And having it worded a particular way is less important to you because you can now see more clearly. Now, I can't get into all that, but for a particular audience, I'm just going to emphasize scriptural authority to a particular audience that operates at that level. And then for a different audience, I may emphasize walking in wisdom and seeing clearly. But I can't emphasize walking in wisdom and seeing clearly for somebody who is at the level where they're battling with Calvinism. Like I don't have to worry about Seraphim becoming a Calvinist, I don't have to worry about that. And so, but if you know what I mean,
That'd
there's
be
like,
funny.
you consider your audience. What were we going to say, Nick?
No, I thought the thought of Seraphim as a staunch Calvinist Reformed person is just comical.
Well, I thought
It
about
seemed
this.
like
He says,
I'm
"Oh, you
sorry.
don't know me very well, Kevin."
Mhm.
Well, that's the problem when people try to put somebody in a box. They hear somebody say something, and then they immediately try to find the part of the Venn diagram they can stick them in.
Mhm.
And so they go, though I don't understand what Seraphim said, so he must be a Calvinist or he must be a
Heretic is the word you're looking for.
But I bet you, and I'm going to put words in Seraphim's mouth here.
Kidding, Seraphim.
I bet you he could talk to a Calvinist audience without alienating them.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the integral viewpoint, you see every perspective as perhaps necessary on that person's journey toward being able to see more clearly.
Right.
So it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's a matter of degree of clarity that person has at the time.
Right. Yeah. We've kind of mythologized Seraphim in a way. Like
Well,
he's
such
almost
a
at the
good
level of
example
Brother
to pick
Melms.
on.
He's almost at the level of Brother Melms,
I don't know.
I almost.
Oh, like at the level, but not for the same reasons.
Yeah,
Right.
no.
He could be the anti-Melms. We could
Like
we could do comics of them fighting.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about their ontological status as mythological figures.
He's like the go-to representative of a particular mindset.
Poor guy.
We need to bring like Christopher Master Pietro on here and Zach Stein. We need to get a few other people who are thinking along those lines and also professing Christians to come stir the pot too. I mean, we need the witch hunters of the world to have a few more targets to aim at. Take a little load off Seraphim a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't seem to bother him too much to be the outlier in a group.
No.
Well, One
I
of the
mean,
things that troubles me, what did you start to say, Kevin? I'm sorry.
I want to hear what you have to say.
Uh, I keep thinking as we're talking that in my personal experience, being in a small group, the group, I view it as somewhat reluctant to grow and change, because to do that would be like stepping out into uncertain waters that they couldn't verify, or um, they they want everything to be presented from the traditional Christian, for lack of a better word, Baptist or Bible church focus. And for me, at this point, I'm thinking we need to kind of break out of that and expand and get a little bit more curious and get a little bit more exploration. But I'm the only one in the group that wants to do that. And so that is certainly a situation where if I want to remain a participant in the group that I'm in, I really have to conform and just kind of go out and do things on my own, because I'm not interested in alienating them, but I'm also not sure of how to bring them along.
What if
You know
there's
what I'm
some way
saying?
you could cause crisis in their lives individually? And I don't mean that like go slash their tires, but like, I wonder if there's something that you could say that would really get them to question
So
something.
yeah, something kind of comes to mind when you're talking about this, and I think it kind of has given me a little bit of a new thing to emphasize. So I think it can be helpful for a group to allow whatever that group is to be personified and cared about. So like we have FSI. So let's personify FSI in our minds in some way. And it's how old? 2.5, 3 years old. And it's a person because we're personifying it. And it can have a gender or something like that,
With a
whatever.
Bible in one hand and a 6-shooter in the other, as Seraphim says.
There you go.
And I think that may have been the purpose of personify, like especially the gospel writer and apostle John, where you kind of get the sense in Paul too. I don't know if Paul ever personifies the church. I guess he does in Ephesians
As
5.
in 2 Corinthians 11, as
Yeah,
a chaste virgin.
right. So I sort of think that may have been the purpose whenever the church is personified at any point, is to get a particular group, whether it's a small group or a large group, whatever, to personify their collective efforts and give them something to care about. And so you can ask a question to this group sort of along those lines, where it's like, if we were bringing up a child or something like that, wouldn't we want that child to be remotely curious and invested in discovering something new? You know what I mean?
I
Because
do.
otherwise, how does it learn? How does it grow? How does it take in new information? How does it deal with adversity? How does it develop the maps and the tools to be, or to equip it to be an actual powerful functioning agent in the world?
So you
It's
take the
like all the same.
concept,
It's
like,
all the same questions you would ask yourself.
yeah,
Why
Jordan
isn't
Peterson says, take care of yourself as if you're someone who needs to be taken care of. And so if you
exactly
personify FSI and you do the same thing with it,
exactly at the group level? Exactly.
wow.
It shouldn't be that hard to do that. And I really think that was the entire purpose of personifying the church in any of Paul's letters or in John's letters or John's writings. Is like, here's a group that is not just a group arbitrarily or around an idea, but that is an actual personal entity. Like, you hear people all the time, oh, Christianity is about relationship, it's about a person. And it's like, oh, really? It's not about just a set of beliefs. Okay, so show me how good you are at developing relationships with persons, how good you are at actually developing persons as such.
So you would get this argument about whether or not FSI was operating in modes or in persons. And then you would get other arguments about whether or not there's a hypostatic union between FSI and BTF. Like the provisionist Calvinist types they would they would devolve down to that level rather than just being, rather than being the thing.
Yeah, they need a new vocabulary set. They need a new grammar scheme to break them out of the nonsense.
Hey, Nick, you got me thinking.
Okay.
You said about grow, right? The growth, right? You mentioned the word growth. So later, just in the past week, I was thinking, because, you hear, when you guys sometimes talk about signal and noise, get rid of the noise and have the signal. I thought, but, what I haven't heard though, but maybe I'm wrong, but noise, what is it? I jotted this down. What kind of noise? And I think if you're going to take the signal and say, this is the signal, you got to explain what the noise is. Because if you don't explain what the noise is, then it sounds like you're taking a lot of, and don't take this the wrong way, but this is how I think why the channel gets hit by a lot of people, meaning they think you're blending, you're taking things and trying to blend into a new age kind of thing. And I'm just going to throw it out because Kevin mentions that, like today I used that triangle, right? I'd be labeled as Illuminati,
Yeah, you're automatically
I'm automatic because I did yeah, I could put the eye, but Jesus said if your eye is single, right? But anyways, I don't mean to go there. I don't want to do
don't get on the dating apps.
Yeah, okay, so what kind of noise is it? I think if you can explain what the noise is too, not just the signal, you got to explain what the noise is and not be afraid to explain what the noise is. And if you and I think, I honestly think you will get a better foundation of trying to build something to get people's trust, because then the word would be expose. You're exposing what the noise is. Yeah. And then back to earlier, I was thinking, we were talking about control. Dan mentioned, the Reformed, and there's a control thing there, but there's a control thing in a lot of the just in religion in general. And one thing that struck me was Jesus said that the truth will make you free. And when you think of the word free, it's not control. It's not freedom to do wickedness, but there's something about, God's love that is totally freedom, even though it's in a structure. Okay. It's freedom built on, righteousness and truth and love and honesty, and you can go on and on and on, but all that is freedom. And it's not control. God is not a control freak, and when you look at the religions of today, it's all about control for the most part.
There's a lot of energy and control.
A lot of energy and control. And I don't know. I just think and then we were talking, you guys were saying, I was thinking like when you're dealing with somebody who is not as knowledgeable or about eating meats offered to idols, what the scripture is really basically saying, look at these, they're weak. They're weak. And you need to humble yourself to help them in their weakness to become free, to free them from their captivity of their weakness in their, does that make any sense? And so, when we're and that's the whole idea of Christianity is to help people, help an individual without you thinking you're on this level and they're on this level. Because if you start doing that, it's almost kind of like, when you say you're here and they're there, you're automatically saying, look at, you're not where I am. And I don't hear like when you like read the scriptures with Moses, I don't get that out of him. You know what I mean? He was supposedly the meekest man in the Bible, right? According to what I understand. So I just think there's a lot of there's freedom in God, but it's just we have turned it in, as a society into a control kind of situation.
And I really like what you said, Billy, about the noise. I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to understand the noise, to learn how to identify the noise.
That's
It's really
what I was
difficult
thinking,
to
yeah.
be sure you got the signal if you can't separate it from the noise.
And
So
how
can
do
I
you
take
discern that?
Can
How
I
do
take
you-
a first stab at that? Because I thought it was really, really.
Because I got a stab at that too. Go ahead, Nick.
So I think this is my first stab. I think the noise is all the things that your pride isn't allowing you to be in that mode of humility like you were talking about, Billy. Because if you're in the mode of humility and you're, like you were saying, you're listening to the person that is speaking, it puts you in a mode where every word that's coming out of their mouth has deep meaning to it, and it no longer becomes noise. So so my first stab is noise is anything that your pride is like kind of jettisoning you to already know. You already know this, or something like that. It's like the pride is blocking you off from hearing the thing that is trying to be said.
So if I take what you're saying, Nick, it sounds like noise is to a degree subjective to the hearer with regard to how they are hearing what's being said.
And I think that because whenever somebody is even merely trying to communicate, like even when an infant is trying to communicate, they don't have the words. They're trying to communicate something meaningful, but you don't have the ears to hear. And so it's noise.
That's such a good point. It's such a good point.
Yeah.
It's just noise.
So if you have the ears to hear, what a phrase. What a phrase
signal.
for Jesus to
All
say.
signal.
He that hath ears to hear. So the thought that hit me, which may have been pre-shot down, is that noise is the propositional ineptitude with which every verbalized concept is packaged.
Okay.
Makes
Say it
sense?
again.
So
Say it again.
the propositional ineptitude with which every verbalized concept is packaged.
Right.
So when, Ian McGilchrist talks about when you try to make explicit the ineffable, you automatically reduce it from the wonderful thing that it is into something else that is, and it's almost an immoral act to even try to do that, or it is an immoral act to even try to do that. But anytime someone tries to speak in prose, what I'm saying is very necessarily not the thing that I'm trying to communicate. And so it is dependent upon the posture of the hearer.
Yes.
To tune into that signal and see through it the thing that is trying to be said.
Yep.
Because that thing will never be said. It will never be said. But it can be pointed to. Like, I can't give you the moon physically. I can talk about it, I can point to it, but I can't actually give it to you. And all the things about in theology, I can never actually put those in your lap. But maybe you can hear through the propositional aptitude with which all the verbalization of those things are packaged. If you have ears to hear, you can get it. It reminds me of that phrase Jesus said, wisdom is justified of her children. If you are really seeking wisdom and somebody says something that is kind of off or cringeworthy, you can hear the true thing that's trying to come through it, even though the words don't do it justice.
Yep. The words might even be like in terms of content or in terms of semantics, not even like I could yell at you like something, but be communicating something very different. Very different. And therefore it's just noise. And the signal is something that the wise and humble hearer / observer is receiving.
Yes.
You know?
So I'm glad you said that. I feel like that is an example right there where we all worked together to put, like, Billy, you brought up the concept of the noise, and then we identified something in the hearer and in the delivery that constitutes noise.
Well,
And
Billy's,
none of that would have came out without the three of us leaning into it, or all of us here.
Billy opened up with the notion of defining and distinguishing signal versus noise, and
Yep.
then ended his speech with the notion of becoming humble with those who you may be in a certain scenario. Like he used on Joe's example from 1 Corinthians 8, where Paul is humbling himself for the sake of those brothers who, in Billy's words, are weaker. So in the flow of Billy's speech, he started with one question and a notion, and in some ways, from what I perceived, answered his own question, what the noise is, which is the noise is the like the inability to humble yourself to the point of meaningful reception of the signal. That's what noise is, you know? And I think the baby example is perfect, you know, because a baby is not communicating anything, quote unquote, semantically meaningful. So it's noise, but if your posture towards the infant is proper, then it's all signal. Oh, they're hungry.
That's what I was going to say. In the scenario that we're discussing, the noise seems to be just as important to hear as the signal, because if it's not being articulated well, then that you can cast off as noise, and you might have missed some important signal.
Yeah, you cannot get noiseless signal. You cannot.
Yeah,
and I'd like to add something to that, like that is a little deeper, I think, maybe, than say that is the noise, that is the source of the noise. And to add to that, it's one possible source of the noise. I'm not wanting to rule out the possibility of other sources. Not that I know what they are, but
so somebody asked in the comments, go back one more step, Kevin. What makes you, or me, or anyone, somebody worth attempting to communicate to? You know, Jesus said, cast not your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn again and rend you. What we're talking about here, I could not have this conversation with somebody like J.D. Martin or Chris Date. It's not, or, you know, God forbid, James White. That conversation is not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? It's not going to. So maybe, I don't know. What do y'all think about that? Does there need to be, like, before you open your mouth and say something to whoever that audience is, whether it's people in this group or your husband or wife or whoever, do you need to have a perception of whether or not they have ears to hear before you open your mouth and start saying stuff?
I don't think I'm at that level consideration. I don't think I have the capacity at this point in my life to be able to consider all of that, because I have enough trouble trying to consider and get the words out that I'm trying to communicate in the first place. You know,
You and me
You're
like
both.
not the
it's
only one.
that's enough for me to manage, you know.
Like
Well,
there's
Um,
things I'm going to say to you, Nick, that I'm not going to say to people who are straight up ideologically possessed Calvinists. I'm just not going to even try.
Yeah.
Right.
I just
And
tr-
so
I
anybody in this group, you know,
I trust my intuition on that. You know what I'm saying? Like I just trust my intuition on whoever I'm talking to for me to not say the thing that might, close their ears further,
right.
but that's about
Right.
as far as it goes in terms of my ability to consider, like I can't have a whole really super drawn out wise
Yeah. It's not like something you can teach. Like, Seraphim says you have to listen to the whispering of the Holy Spirit, being open to the presence of God and the whispering of the Holy Spirit. And, I'd have to dig further. I'd have to, left hemisphere that in order to grab a hold of it.
Well, another aspect to this too is that for us to go out into a different scenario where we're not together and we try to do this, then suddenly we're in a situation where everybody isn't playing by the same rules of the game. And so you've got to deal with that. They have no clue how to respond to you, signal and noise wise, even though you're trying to do that with them. And so it still makes it really difficult. You see what I mean? I'm just,
yeah.
if they're not responsive to that, what do you do with it? I mean, you're just kind of shut down in that. Are you not? Or maybe somebody more adept could get around it.
I was having a conversation with somebody at volleyball, and the person I was talking to had a doctorate degree, and they're a professor, and they're doing research on neurology. They're a neurobiological something. They deal with geneticist, a neurobiological geneticist.
Wow.
And they're studying like the brain and the functions of the brain, and their husband and wife team working together. They're both highly educated, and they're also studying different kinds of animals where they can have parts of their body grow back, like fish that can grow back fins and things like that, and trying to understand the genetics of that and how that might be adaptable to something else. Anyway, she was an atheist, grew up Catholic, and is an atheist now, is very, very highly educated, very smart. I was able to have a better conversation with her about faith in the Tillich sense, connectedness with that which is of ultimate concern, than I could with a typical stage 3 Christian. Because she really thinks that her genetic research can change the world and make everyone's life better. That's some stage 5, stage 6 kind of stuff, you see? And she's attempting to establish meaningful connectivity to a wide swath of people, and has committed her life to doing that. And you could kind of think of maybe someone like Gandhi, I don't know, just anybody you can think of, that Mother Teresa, I don't know if a good example people won't object to, but it kind of reminded me of somebody who is willing to really give up their life for the sake of making the world better when they're not here, which is pretty profound.
I don't run into too many of those people.
Jesus is really the only one that comes to mind.
Hey, I want y'all to think about this before we go. I'm in Stages of Faith, and I'm on page 298. I'm talking about the Apostle Paul here. Because somebody said, we don't see Moses doing this Stages of Faith thing, but I want to think about this. I want to do some videos on this. I want to introduce you to this idea on page 298. Before leaving this question of the descriptive range of the stage theory of faith, let me introduce one other set of considerations. Studies we've had and others have done suggest that the stage sequence identified here is not applicable just in the modern period. It seems likely, for example, that St. Paul can be understood as being best described by stage 4, individual reflective faith, at the time of his life-changing encounter on the Damascus Road. His early writings reflect the sharp dichotomies, the concern with the inclusion and exclusion, and the passion for authenticity and the purity of commitment that are hallmarks of stage 4. Paul's later writings, moreover, exhibit the more dialectical style of the conjunctive stage, stage 5. He struggles with the vocation of the Jews and Gentiles and how to be in but not of the world, with how to square weakness with power, with death and death with life. Then in certain passages of his mature writings, Paul clearly manifests the universalizing qualities of stage 6 faith. I think it would be very interesting to run with this football, put all of Paul's writings in chronological order, and see if we can identify the stageness of what he's presenting. So we're all saying it's scripture, right? So it's scripture. It's not like you have to be stage 6 in order to be working in and for and of God. It is you can serve and be in touch with God at whatever stage the particular person is at. And it should not be a thing to provoke jealousy or rivalry or pride or anything like that. But if we could remove the aspects of the left hemisphere / meaning crisis from how it has affected Christianity, I think we could have non-rivalrous interaction between all the different stages. It's very interesting to me. Anyway, that's a project that I kind of want to do, is do that with the New Testament. If anybody is willing to help scourge Paul's writings in chronological order and provide content for this, or we could have discussions on it, which I think would be fun. I want to move in that direction.
I would request that, I finished that book last night and I was amazed because I thought, every word he used in there just about, I understood the meaning of, but the way he put them in sentences, it's like, what the heck are you saying? I don't know how I could read things and understand the words, but not understand the concept. So it would be helpful for me to just have an ABC 1, 2, 3 on what those stages actually look like, because I finished that and I'm thinking, I'm still not real sure I understand totally, that whole stage thing. But if I'm the only one, I'll catch up.
I share that with you because having read it and very much enjoyed it, I'm kind of halt on a few particulars.
Yeah, so it's important to, I think, point this out as an encouragement. There are no stages of faith. That's not a thing. There's no such thing as stages of faith. What he's providing you with is a grammar scheme or an articulation of trying to understand something like faith. So he's providing you with a grammar set or a schema in order that you might understand something about the world a little bit better. But in all of reality, there's no such thing as stages of faith. That's, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think you're saying, Nick, it's like a model where all models
as a model
are wrong, but some are useful.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like the 4 types of knowing.
Yeah.
Like it's really a grammar scheme in order for you to understand some phenomenon that's going on in the world. But it's not like you are rigidly encapsulated in them.
You've got
don't
your
have to be
feet in all
dogmatic about it.
stages.
Exactly. So
It's
to
a
say that
schema.
you don't fully understand the schema that is coming out of the book is not, that he probably doesn't really understand it as well as you might think.
No, he
He's
said they're
using a
still
language set.
exploring it. But
Right.
Yeah, I can imagine some things don't exactly fit And it may not be just because we don't understand it or he didn't understand it, or it may be just the nature of the model, you know.
Well,
It's an
yeah, I think
approximation.
the model could be updated drastically if you were to inject some Vervaeke and McGilchrist into his verbiage and understanding, because he wrote this in 1980. You know,
Yeah.
so
So,
if you
the
could,
internet's not even really that much of a thing yet.
yeah,
So
yeah, Al Gore had not really populated it yet after he invented it.
Well, I'm so old, I was using it then, but very few other people were.
The
Well,
Aloha Net, yeah,
the web did not even exist in 1980. The internet
it did in
did, but not the
1960.
web.
No, it wasn't until
or something like that.
84.
Well,
Well,
the
the web.
concept.
The web was later. The internet existed like
Yeah.
84.
Yeah, in 69, actually.
So I
Well,
got to go,
ARPANET.
guys. I'm out
Okay.
of time. That's code speak for I can hear what I can smell what Paul is cooking. I can hear a little bit too. Anyway, I got to head out. But any last words before we go?
I'm glad we recorded this one because I think a lot of things busted open in this one.
Yeah, this
I'm
is
glad
great.
you were here. It's good to see you again.
So I written
Yes.
something down really quick here about the noise. It's real fast. I jotted this down. If you're in tune to understand the noise, you will be able to chart its direction.
Okay.
I get it.
I like the directionality concept because things are
Yeah.
dynamic and not static.
And you can also interchange if you're in tune with the signal. You'll be able to the same thing. You'll be able to chart its direction.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was thinking of a completely different use of the metaphor of signal and noise than where we ended up going with it. Just something to throw out there.
Can you speak it real quick?
I'm not sure if we have time, but basically I was thinking of people like James White as noise, the people that have manipulative techniques to persuade people that end up masking the signal. And that's the kind of noise I was thinking of, that it's very good to understand how to identify it so that you're not fooled by it.
So there's this Beavis and Butthead episode that I saw when I was a kid. And Beavis says, "Why do some things have to suck?" You know? And so Butthead starts smacking him. Whoosh. Ow, quit it. Whoosh. What'd you do that for? And he's like, "Isn't it pretty cool that I'm not hitting you anymore?" It's like the whole idea that some things suck is so that we can recognize when other things don't. I really think that there would be a lot of signal that went unproduced if it wasn't for the James Whites of the world creating a bunch of noise that needed to be responded to.
Yeah.
And if there was no James White, maybe nobody would find Leighton Flowers in a Google search. You know what I'm saying? Something, or there maybe there would be no David Allen books. Maybe there would be no what's the guy who wrote the Augustinian stuff?
Oh, Ken Wilson.
Wilson.
Maybe there would be no Ken Wilson book. You see what I'm saying? There's a lot of signal that came in response to a lot of noise. So in the overall schema, the availability of signal, in my opinion, does depend on the presence of noise.
Good and evil.
Hey, order and chaos. I got to go, guys.
Bye.
This has been great.
Peace
So
out.
I would, I do want to keep having discussions on whatever we want to talk about is fine, but I'll be aiming toward whatever the most recent content on the channel is. That way we can have some back and forth and maybe kind of grow some concepts together as an entity.
Okay.
All right, guys. Peace out.